people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. Developments out of the women's light flyweight division, where Evelyn Bermudez, unified champion, is set to be returning to action opposite the ring former champion Tenkai Tsunami of Japan March 8th in Argentina in defense of her WBO and IBF titles. Tenkai posted on her social media, quote-unquote, "The game is set." Tenkai Tsunami. You may be familiar with that name. That's the same Tenkai Tsunami that Sinicia Estrada fought at this same weight class 1 or 2 years ago. She actually gave Sinicia a hard time, sporting a professional record of 32 wins with 13 losses, 1 draw, 19 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 46 professional bouts. And that's saying a lot because she's been around the block, fought some really good fighters over the years, a veteran of the sport who still lingers.
Never been knocked out.
She'll be facing Evelyn, who sports a professional record of 20 wins with 1 loss, 1 draw, 7 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 22 professional bouts, comparatively less experienced than Tenkai Tsunami, but that's not saying much because most fighters are less experienced than Tenkai. In a very general sense, Evelyn is experienced in her own right. She's been around the block. She's fought some very good fighters, won some fights, lost just one to Yokostia Valle. In what was Yokostia's brief stint in the women's light flyweight division, she moved up, beat Evelyn, dropped the belts, then moved back down.
Wow.
That was in November of 2022. Since then, Evelyn has fought 3 times and won 3 times. Last in action in May of last year opposite the ring Jessica Salazar, who she stopped in 8 rounds. That was the only fight that Evelyn had last year.
This will be her first fight of this one, and let's hope that this turns out to be a more productive year for this division's only unified champion.
And what has been a respectable run. She gave Tania Enriquez her first professional loss in March of 2023, beat Kim Clavel that same year in Kim Clavel's neck of the woods in Canada.
Respectable.
And as stated, she was last in action in May of last year, racked up another win. So now she's fighting Tenkai in what promises to be an all-action shootout, because Tenkai's an action fighter, and so is Evelyn. They're both mid-range to inside volume punchers, tough ones that have never been stopped.
Similar methodology between the fighters, similar schedule too. Tenkai only fought once last year, just like Evelyn. That was in June.
Now she's challenging for not 1 but 2 alphabet titles in the women's light flyweight division. What do I think? I think the edge has to go to Evelyn. It's got to go to Evelyn because she's the fresher, younger fighter of the two. Tenkai is experienced, perhaps too experienced.
She's 40 years old.
To Evelyn, who's a very fresh and fly 27. This will be televised in Argentina by way of TYC Sports. What I think has been the bane of women's boxing over the years is that there really are a lot of great fights, a lot of great action fights that the casual fan doesn't often hear about because not everybody gets the same coverage.
There's still more work needs doing. There have been leaps and strides and progress, but there's still more work needs doing.
This is actually an excellent fight for Evelyn to start the year off with. It's going to be an all-action shootout, and I favor her to win the points decision. I don't think she's going to stop Tenkai, but I do think she'll do enough to win on points.
She's got home field advantage, so that helps.
One of 3 reigning champions in the women's light flyweight division. There's Evelyn Bermudez, holding both the IBF and WBO titles. There's Mexico's own Lourdes Torres. She's got the WBC. And then there's Canada's own Sarah Bailey, who's got the WBA, arguably the weakest link, the weakest champion at the weight, not because she's not a good fighter. She's a good fighter. She's just a lot less experienced than the other 2 champions. She only has 5 fights.
And a lot of catching up to do.
Oddly enough, I don't expect Lourdes Juarez or Evelyn Bermudez to go breathing down her neck to take what she's got. because there's not a lot of money behind Sarah, and there's not a lot of money behind them. To do a unification match, you have to pay to play. If you expect one champion to fight another champion, they're gonna want to get paid like it. And because none of these three champions have a major promoter behind them, I don't expect that anybody's gonna come kicking down Sarah's door to take her belt.
Evelyn regularly fights on television in Argentina. There's enough money behind her to keep her active
And you could say the same about Lourdes, you could say the same about Sarah, that they can get them title defenses, but to get a champion, that's gonna be more expensive.
So I don't expect either Evelyn or Lourdes to come sniffing around looking for Sarah's belt. Maybe Kim Clavel will. Sarah's countrywoman and former unified champion at this weight. She's got a fight with Annabelle Ortiz coming up. I anticipate that maybe sometime after that, she'll set her sights on Sarah.
Or Lourdes.
One of them.
Since she's already been there and done that with Evelyn. In any event, Evelyn will be returning to action next month in defense of her 2 Alphabet titles, and I anticipate she will win a points decision.
Talk more about the fight as the fight date approaches.
Elsewhere in the world of boxing, the continued fallout of the Stevenson versus Schofield cancellation, and the byproduct of a sport that is now covered more by its patrons than actual pundits, than actual journalists.
These are very strange times.
That a content creator can have more influence within the sport than an actual accredited journalist, somebody who actually went to school for this.
Comes from that field.
For no other reason than the number of followers or the number of views their videos normally get, whether they're accurate or not.
And oftentimes they're not.
These days, the audience cares more about the wrapping paper than what's in the box.
The presentation.
Oh yes, I came across some sensationalized headlines from at least one popular content creator, Floyd Schofield, supposedly being poisoned by Snack Systems, by Victor Conti, by Team Stevenson.
Oh, bullshit.
All of which they have since walked back on. That's right. They took it all back, apologized to everybody, though not before the content creators got to make some coin propagating that narrative.
The dichotomy of everything has changed because it's not about being accurate anymore so much as how fast you can get a story out there or react to it. And when that's the focus,
When the focus is speed, not accuracy,
you just get a lot of junk.
a lot of nothing. That begets nothing. It was different before because you had actual journalists attached to major news periodicals with a reputation, and thus there was some emphasis on accurate reporting. That's not the case anymore because so many of these content creators are their own boss, and if they miss the mark, they don't really have anybody to answer to.
Their reputation might take a hit, their credibility.
But it's the strangest thing that some of the worst boxing channels in the YTBC also happen to be some of the biggest.
Their subscriber base does not rely upon accurate reporting or accurate predictions, accurate forecasts, or even the real topography of the boxing landscape. It's a niche within a niche.
Catering to dumb dullards who want to hear a story, who want to hear a good narrative, who want to hear pretty little lies.
How do you think that Glovegate fiasco took off so fast? There were so many people that were ready to believe it, wanted to believe it.
So that a few years later, when an actual boxer makes a sensationalistic claim with no real basis in reality, all the content creators see are the dollar signs.
Just like in 2020 with the Glovegate fiasco.
There were a lot of content creators that made a lot of money propagating that narrative, and I myself made a lot of money from debunking it.
Good times.
To know, as soon as it took for this to become a controversy is as soon as it took for the controversy to be quelled, for the whole thing to go away. Though not before, the would-be journos used that to drum up metrics, whether it was true or not, because they don't care if it was true or not.
It's all about shock value now.
And how fast you can get your content out, and thus the quality and the coverage that boxing now gets
Lessened as of late.
what makes for a more interactive experience for the boxing fan comes at the expense of quality. Well, yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's an ocean of videos out there about the sport of boxing, but how many of them are worth watching?
There's any number of individual content creators that have an opinion, but how many of those opinions are actually worth listening to?
That's the question. In men's heavyweight news, on the heels of his comeback fight, Jared Anderson is hoping for a Martin Bakole rematch. And I was actually surprised to read this.
You want to fight that guy again?
Everyone has a game plan until they get hit. It's your typical boxing cliche, but there was nothing mendacious about that statement on this particular night. From boxing and moving to fighting for survival, Anderson no longer walks around with an undefeated record. The trade-off, nevertheless, while painful, might have been worth it. I learned that I'm never going to be the toughest, never going to be the strongest. I've got to go in there with a good game plan and stick to it. Anderson recently told The Ring. I got hit with a good shot early on. I strayed away from any game plan if I had one, and I just tried to be the toughest guy. Obviously, it didn't work out for me. It'll take some time before the new and improved Jared Anderson is clicking on all cylinders. This past weekend, at the theater in New York's Madison Square Garden, the 25-year-old didn't look like his smooth self. He looked clumsy and clunky as he won a fairly wide decision against the part-time boxer / roofer. While the wrinkles are being ironed out, Anderson wants to remain active, putting time between himself and the worst night of his professional life as a natural reaction. But eventually, Anderson doesn't want to just run away from the past. If he can pick up a few solid wins and stay relevant, then running things back with Bakole has to happen. If a rematch does take place, don't expect the same old Anderson either. Instead, expect one that uses both his brain and his brawn.
Easier said than done.
The way that Martin Bakole just took him apart and was so calm, so cool, and so poised while he did it, just waiting to explode. It was like getting hit with a water balloon full of urine.
What?
Nothing that Jared Anderson tried with Martin was working. He certainly couldn't match his power.
Jared Anderson's punches had no effect on Martin Bakole. He got in with a few good ones, but they didn't do nothing.
Whereas every time Martin landed on Jared, he took the wind out of his sails, and now he's talking about running it back with him down the line?
I would love to fight him again. I think this time I would be a lot smarter, a lot wiser. I would definitely take a different approach to the fight if it ever happens again.
It's not outside the realm of possibility that Jared Anderson can come again.
Daniel Dubois did after his loss to Joe Joyce and another one to Alexander Usyk, but look at him now.
IBF champion. He did it.
So it's not outside the realm of possibility that Jared Anderson can rebuild, but what about probability, the likelihood of him being able to rebuild? Based on what I saw in the Colias fight, he looked dejected, depressed, disinterested.
Disenfranchised, not driven. Not what you hope to see from a guy who says he wants to go back into the lion's den with the guy who destroyed him.
At one point in the fight, he literally goes back to his corner and says, I don't want to go 10 rounds with this guy.
Okay, then knock him out.
He's a part-time boxer. The guy's literally a part-time boxer. He's a roofer who moonlights as a boxer. And if you couldn't get rid of him, I don't think you're getting rid of Martin Bakole anytime in the near future.
Sorry, you never thought you'd hear the day
Ever.
that a British fighter's got more dog in him and more fight than an American. American boxers used to be the gold standard in the sport. Not anymore, and especially not in the heavyweight division.
I brought up Daniel Dubois as a fighter who was able to recover and rebuild. I don't think Jared Anderson has that kind of resolve or intestinal fortitude. I don't. When I see a guy say that he don't want to go 10 rounds with a guy...
You don't want to go 10 rounds? It sounds to me like you don't want to work. But if you don't want to go 10 rounds, knock the guy out.
Hit the gas.
Jared Anderson didn't. I don't want to speak too soon, but I'm just telling you, based on what I saw, those eggs are going to need more bacon. A lot more bacon.
Because I didn't see anything encouraging about Jared Anderson's performance this past weekend.
And the beating that he took at the hands of Martin Bakole is the kind of beating that perhaps stays with you. Not physically per se, but perhaps mentally.
I mean, I would say it's going to be a long road back to the top, but Jared Anderson never actually got there.
Elsewhere in the heavyweight division this past weekend, it was announced that unbeaten up-and-comer from right here in the US of A, Richard Torres, will be facing Italy's own amateur stand-up, Guido Vianello. In a heavyweight contest scheduled for 10 rounds, we can consider this a step up in class for young Richard, 25 years old, to Guido, who's 30.
Guido is an orthodox fighter, whereas Richard is a southpaw. Guido is the taller, longer fighter of the two, standing in at 6'6" to Richard, who's 6'2".
That didn't used to be small for a heavyweight.
It didn't.
In previous eras of boxing, when you consider that both Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, who seemed like giants at the time, only stood in at about 6'3", just 1 inch taller than Richard.
Times have changed.
Richard Torres sports professional record of 12 wins with no losses, no draws, 11 knockouts. Seemingly a very strong puncher, authoritative at this level. Mid-range to inside is its sweet spot, and given his small stature for a heavyweight, it has to be. He doesn't have the height or length to box from the outside, so he spends a lot of time trying to get on the inside.
Coming in at a slight crouch, bending at the waist and bending at the knees, that lower center of gravity services as a springboard to propel him forward with looping shots, big ones that have a lot of power.
I like this kid. He's got a good air about him.
But then again, so did Jared Anderson up until he started spiraling out of control and losing his drive.
The jury's still out on Richard Torres and how far he can go. Perhaps Guido Vianello can tell us, sporting a professional record of 13 wins with 2 losses, 1 draw, 11 knockouts, having been knocked out once in 16 professional bouts.
It wasn't a Colt knockout. He got stopped on cuts.
That was in the Johnny Rice fight in January of 2023, 2 years ago. Got stopped on cuts in the 7th round. He rebounded off that loss to Johnny Rice with Curtis Harper and Moses Johnson, but then he dropped a split decision to F.A. Ajagba in a fight that I felt Guido should have won, but he didn't get the nod. He didn't get the decision so that he could move on from that and rebound off of that loss, stopping Arslanbek Makhmudov in 8 rounds. Now he's fighting Richie. Guido Vianello is a good fighter. Big guy, but he can move. He's coordinated, he's got height, he's got length, and he's got footwork. Coordination.
Some power.
He's not the most heavy-handed guy, but he can land with authority. So this fight is a question of who's going to control the distance at which the fight is being fought, because Guido's going to move around to keep distance, whereas Richie's going to come forward to close it.
Can he do that safely? Can he do that without walking into something?
Richard Torres, who fought 4 times last year, 4 times, which is what you expect for a young fighter who's just starting out.
Just want to fight who fights the most often.
This is a step up in class for Richard Torres. Comparatively, Guido Vianello has fought more game opponents more times than Richard has had the opportunity to, and that makes this a step up for Richie, who looks like Super Mario on steroids.
Right.
And it's hard to say that he'll be able to seal the deal against another amateur standout like himself, who is a bit more seasoned than he is in the paid ranks.
It's not saying that he can't, it's saying we don't know.
Because we are still getting to know Richard Torres as a fighter. How bankable is he? How is he going to contend with Guido's height, length, counters, power, and movement? How's he going to look?
We'll talk more about the fight as the fight date approaches.